But welcome everybody today to the first in our Young Mental Health Leaders series with Mental Health America and Global Mental Health at Harvard initiative. Today we'll be talking about peer support and youth mental health. So I'll go over a little bit about what the series is, about both of our organizations, some housekeeping items for today. I'll introduce our panelists and then they will have a conversation. And once we get to about 15 minutes left, we're gonna go for an hour. We will have some time for Q&A. So certainly feel free to chat in the chat box throughout the session. Juliana from GMH at Harvard is gonna be monitoring, hello. And then I'll be monitoring as well. But definitely if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A so we can get to it and keep track of them for the end of the session. So the Young Mental Health Leaders series is really designed, my name's Kelly Davis. I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Kelly Davis, I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Associate Vice President of Peer and Youth Advocacy at Mental Health America. So my work really focuses on the expansion of peer support programs, but also the importance of empowering folks with lived experience to create solutions and policy programs and organizations. And that includes amplifying the work that young people with lived experience are already doing. And this collaboration with MHA and GMH at Harvard is really about, these programs around youth mental health and young people's advocacy and peer support are not nice add-ons, but they're really things that are effective and supported by research. So through this collaboration, we're bringing together researchers from Harvard's network and young leaders from MHA's network to have some awesome conversations and then promote their work and hopefully bring you all together as well in the audience. So for housekeeping, so all participants are muted and unable to turn on their microphones. We are recording today's session, so I will send a link of the recording within the next week. I'll also drop in that email to you all, some of the links of things that we're talking about today. And then as always, our MHA webinars are on our website at mhanational.org/webinars, where you can find all of the recordings and then some of the things that we have coming up. We also have closed captioning that you can enable at the bottom of your screen if you would like closed captions, and we do not offer CEUs, so you can receive a certificate of attendance from the email, but the MHA webinars are not formally accepted by, for example, if you're a licensed clinical social worker or any of the formal certification bodies. And then finally, again, when using the chat box, you can use the chat box or the Q&A. If you want to have the questions discussed as part of the Q&A at the end of our session, I definitely recommend putting them in the Q&A as opposed to the chat box. Like I said, Juliana and I will be chatting with y'all, but really want to make sure that they're prioritized and kept in the same space. So for the real show here, so I'll introduce the awesome cast of presenters that we have, and then we'll turn it over to Dr. Cindy Liu, who will be moderating our session. So to get started, Satvik Sethi is with us today. So Satvik is a 22-year-old mental health activist and social entrepreneur on a journey to make the world happy. Originally from New Delhi, India, Satvik currently lives and works in New York. He's the founder and chief executive officer at Runaway, a social venture promoting mental health awareness and helping those in need of emotional support. Runaway has been featured by UNICEF, the World Health Organization, Vice, and other networks. Satvik also serves as an independent expert advisor at Wellcome Trust UK to guide research and policy development for youth mental health. And he's also rocking some cool Runaway merch that you can get at his website if you're interested. And then I will turn it next to Martin Rafferty. So Martin Rafferty is the founder and CEO of Youth Era, a national nonprofit that is revolutionizing current thinking about how we view youth engagement. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Discovery Center highlighted Martin Rafferty as one of 8 global change makers. He was awarded the 2010 Oregon Mental Health Award of Excellence, Advocate of the Year by the Oregon Council of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry in 2013, and was named one of the 20 under 40 rising business stars in 2018. Most recently, Martin was awarded the 2020 Henry J. Grass MD Access Award by the Oregon Psychiatric Physicians Association. Next up from Youth Era as well, we have Tia Barnes. So Tia is the Chief Program Officer at Youth Era, where she oversees the organization's international direct services, program development, and national technical assistance. She was a key designer of the Youth Era Drop Model, a co-creator of Youth Peer Support Specialist certifications across the nation, and has provided training to agencies to increase youth voice within their programs. Most recently, she was a lead designer of an international cultural responsiveness training for youth and young adults. Barnes was one of the authors to create Uplift, which you'll hear about today, an international peer-to-peer course provided to high schoolers from 4 different countries as a joint research project with the University of Oxford. In addition to her extensive experience, among other honors, Tia received an Award of Excellence in the field of youth peer support in 2015. And finally, we'll introduce our wonderful moderator, Dr. Cindy Liu. So Dr. Liu is an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School, the director of the Developmental Risk and Cultural Resilience Program within the Departments of Pediatric, Newborn Medicine, and Psychiatry at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and a licensed clinical psychologist. Her research focuses on stress and mental health within the lifespan, including the perinatal period and young adulthood, and she is currently a principal investigator for the COVID-19 Adult Resilience, I can't talk today, Experiences Study, a longitudinal study that seeks to understand the experiences of college students and young adults throughout the pandemic. Her work has been funded by the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation and featured in various outlets, including the New York Times, USA Today, and CBS News. So with that, you know how impressive and wonderful our panelists are. And I will turn it over to Dr. Liu, who will facilitate a conversation where y'all will learn more and ask questions about young people's mental health and peer support throughout the pandemic and moving forward.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for that wonderful, wonderful introduction to all of us. It's my pleasure and honor to be here today and to speak and learn from our young luminaries in the field of young adult mental health and the role of peer supports. As a way of sharing a little bit more about my interests, I'm a clinical psychologist, and we know from our work in the past several years that young adults are facing a crisis when it comes to mental health. We are seeing upwards to about half of young adults who have mental health concerns. And we also too see that there's more awareness as well. And so, you know, there's this awareness, but also a rise in stress and mental health that we are now trying to learn more about. And when it comes to the pandemic, young adults were one of the first to be affected in terms of leaving their campuses. And so that was something that we were concerned about in our lab, were the students that were wondering when they would have to leave campus. And when they did have to leave campus, we were wondering where they were going to move to. And so they were among the first to have to leave physically. And we were fortunate enough to get funding from the National Science Foundation to be able to follow young adults, including college students, over time. So we've been learning a lot about their experiences. And interestingly, you know, as we're learning more about the pandemic, the virus has, you know, affected individuals who are older. And so for a while, we were thinking that young adults were not necessarily prone to the negative and direct effects of the virus, but more recently, we are also seeing concerns related to the long-term health of young adults. And most of our concerns have been about what the pandemic and sort of the secondary effects would be on graduation, sort of the uncertainty about the future, financial concerns, young adulthood. You see a lot of milestones that are that take place, including, you know, again, graduation, perhaps meeting a partner, starting school, becoming independent, and all of that has been somewhat thrown awry by the pandemic. And another aspect of this past year that we have seen in our data is that it's not just the pandemic, but also the social climate. And in fact, the social climate, you know, the discrimination, the rhetoric, all of these aspects of our experience this past year has had a profound experience for young adult mental health. And so these are all many reasons for which we want to understand more about how peer supports can actually be perhaps a means for being able to address these concerns. And so I'm here today because I hope to learn so much from our panelists here today about the role of peers. And so I thought we could start off by having you all speak on and elaborate a bit more on your role, why you started this work, and what your organization is doing. And so if Satvik, if you could start us off in sharing more about that.
Sure, thank you so much. Really excited to be here. My experiences with mental health go all the way back to middle school. And it was a time when myself and a lot of my peers around me were going through mental health problems. But obviously, at the time, we didn't really know these were mental health problems. It was just challenges that we were going through, and there was really no solution. I also grew up in India where mental health is such a stigmatized topic to talk about. So a lot of us never really felt comfortable just talking to our families about this and reaching out for help. Around this time, I used to also go online on platforms like Instagram and look for people who were using social media to reach out for help. And I just simply reach out to them, have a conversation like I would with a friend, and just help these strangers out with whatever they were going through. And after talking to over 450 strangers online, when I came to college my freshman year, I realized that there was still so much pain out there in the world. There were so many people who were still struggling that I just decided that, I have to take this step wherein other people who are also passionate about making a difference and helping others can come join me. And that's really how the idea for Runaway was born. And the goal for us was, I always say my mission is to make the world happier. And that's really what Runaway is hoping to achieve with everything we do. And so an aspect of it is obviously the peer support side, where we're training students to become peer support volunteers and help others facilitate conversations. But then we're also sharing a lot of free mental health resources, education and information, and just really doing whatever we can to ensure that young people, especially who've often been such an overlooked majority and such an overlooked demographic when it comes to accessibility of mental health resources, really get everything that they need, and that we can continue to ensure that they're always part of the conversations that are being had around young people's mental health.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And Martin, can you go next? Share a little bit about your role, what motivates you to do this work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started this organization in 2009, and I think it goes back to my early childhood. My family experienced a lot of domestic abuse, and it was very traumatic. And what actually ended up helping me was I guess you could call her a rogue social worker, decided to take me home. And so from the ages of 11 to 16, from the law's perspective, I was kidnapped, right? And this woman who took me in had a specialty in working with youth who had been traumatized. And so her work with me was really the only thing that could help me, because when it came to my situation, I was system weary, right? My family had been very against ever going in to get any kind of services. And so as I got a little bit older, I realized that there were a lot of young people who, for a lot of different reasons, could not access traditional systems. And so that's why I started Youth Era. Youth Era is the largest employer of youth peer support specialists now. And we really work from a grassroots spirit about how we can come behind young people and empower them. We say empowerment isn't about saving people. Empowerment's about restoration. And so we work with, we've worked with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Google sent us Google virtual reality sets when they were prototypes to do school shooting responses. The work that we do is very, very broad, but all of it can be summed back to we are here to help reach young people that might not be able to be reached by the system, or even young people who are accessing systems, but for whatever reason, the engagement factor is off.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And there's so much more to unpack with that. But we'll go on to Tia. Can you say a little bit about your role and how you started this work?
Yeah, hi everybody. Happy to be here. My name is Tia Barnes. As Kelly said, my title is the Chief Program Officer here at Youth Era, and I use she, her pronouns. I started at Youth Era 9 years ago, and haven't looked back ever since. And so, as Martin said, Youth Era is a peer-run organization. So all of our staff identify as peers with lived experience, which is a really, really special component of the work that we do. And so our services encompass everything from our drop-in centers in person to community-based peer support specialists, all the way to peer support specialists within the wraparound setting. For COVID, our services have, of course, shifted like many other organizations, and we have a lot of new exciting virtual programs. And so we offer our virtual drop-in center on Discord. We also offer peer support on Twitch. And then we have a new program called Uplift, which hopefully we'll talk a little bit about today. But in my role, I oversee some of our peer support services, as well as work alongside the technical assistance team around some national trainings and things like that as well. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here.
Great. So, I want to actually get us sort of thinking about peers. And, from your stories, you've shared about how your lives have been changed by engaging with somebody else earlier in your life. And somehow there was power that was harnessed from that interaction. So there is power in relationships for good and for bad. Can you speak a little bit more about what's so significant about the relationship with peers? Like, why is that transformative in addressing mental health? Martin, you want to go ahead?
Sure. So, and I'm sure the other panelists will have something to add here. It is one of the subjects that I think as a field, we need to do a better elevator speech. And so the concept that I really think works best when you're explaining peer support is that, let's say you break your arm, and it's pre-COVID, right? You break your arm, you want to show up at a hospital, and what you expect is that those clinicians, those doctors, that they have hundreds of years of experience that they've passed on and put into a model, so that when they're treating you, you're not actually just being treated by the doctor in front of you, right? You're actually being treated by the doctors before them and the researchers before them. For hundreds of years, we've passed this on, right? You don't want to show up to a doctor who has no idea about any of those lessons learned, right? When it comes to peer support, we are in the infancy of thinking about mental health. Like, when you think about how far we've come with physical health versus mental health, it's very early with mental health. And I think what's special about the peer position is that those people aren't showing up with those hundreds of years of clinical health knowledge. They're showing up with their experiences as a person. And because of that, the connection that's possible between a peer to someone who needs help, who needs support, it feels and it's delivered differently. And it's also something that can go further than 9 to 5. So emergencies happen outside of normal business hours, and there are people who get into situations that might not have the ability to access these clinical therapies and all of those, which are really important. And so the peer support role is different because the person behind that role is showing up and they're saying, I have lived experience. I've walked on a similar road, not the same road, but a similar road, and this is how I did it. And so being able to hold space from the authority of lived experience versus the authority of hundreds of years of science and research is what I think makes peer support effective and makes it possible to reach people that wouldn't necessarily be able to be reached by any other means.
That's great. And I mean, I think what I'm hearing you say is that people feel heard from their peers, perhaps more so than a healthcare provider, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that also, it might also address stigma, especially with mental health, where it's, so hard to disclose that you do want to be, heard, but also not judged. Tia, would you could you share a little bit about your thoughts related to this, the sort of power of peer supports?
Yeah, definitely. I think with peer support, it's so special as, you know, when we're thinking about like crisis or our mental health symptoms or whatever trauma we're experiencing in those moments, you know, you feel like so alone and like there can't be anyone else who is experiencing this too right now. And then the peer support comes in and they say, hey, I've been there too, or like, this is what that looked like for me. And that can feel like, it feels so reassuring in that moment. And so that's where that really special connection forms and kind of helps combat that stigma. And I think with peer support, it's so unique too, because it puts you on this even playing field where really we're, you know, walking alongside them, but also kind of learning together. You know, there really isn't that hierarchy in place or anything like that. And then it really, I think the best part about peer support is that it really develops you know, kind of bridges those gaps between youth and the services. And so that peer support specialist can say, hey, like, this is what worked for me, or have you thought of therapy? Like, I really enjoy talking with my therapist and this is how it's helped me. And so it kind of rebuilds some of those relationships that may have been broken or not really established. And you can hear it from somebody that you really trust, you know, especially in a world where now, like, so many of us rely on reviews and referrals from our friends and things like that. Peer support kind of fits in very naturally to that setting where it feels like, okay, I have a really warm entry into like getting the help that I need.
Great, that's really helpful. And what about you, Satvik?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge peer support advocate, and I think one of the best reasons that I am such a huge advocate is because it's a very good way for people just to get in the practice of actually reaching out and asking for help. Because I work primarily with young people, and professional services, therapy, counseling, one, it's obviously very expensive for a lot of young people to afford, but also there's this, I think, generational stigma that's attached to it. And a lot of young people are very hesitant in going to a professional, but when options like peer support become more readily available, it's something that can get young people in the practice of just accepting that they're in a position where it might be nice to get help from someone and talk to someone about what they're going through. For me, peer support has also been such an interesting exercise in empathy and learning from one another, because when I used to talk to people on Instagram and offer that peer support to them, I spoke to people from over 50 different countries, and obviously part of those conversations were about mental health, but then you naturally tend to go into talking about cultures and, you know, some of your passions, hobbies, and that in itself was such an enriching experience that really does kind of broaden your mindset, broaden your perspective, and teach you a lot about how things in the world work. So, I mean, yeah, I'll love peer support, and it's something that I continue to inculcate in our team at Runaway and also just young people that we work with to continue to pay it forward, because I think peer support is one of those areas where obviously, you know, you could be professionally trained and it does give you that advantage and it does help you in conversations. But at the same time, you don't have to be professionally trained to offer that peer support to your peers and to your friends and family. And I think that's one of the great things about it, is how accessible it makes mental health help for everyone.
Oh, that's great. And it, you know, it reminds me of when, you know, as a psychologist, I think about, you know, our patients, but at the same time, I'm a friend to those who may be suffering from mental health. And it's actually a very different hat that I wear. And it's a different sort of way of engaging. And so I can totally see, based on all your responses, how critical peers are. And oftentimes providers, we sort of rely on that peer network. But we don't really offer a lot of sort of resources for that network, and so it's wonderful to hear what you've done. You know, my question is, and because I'm concrete, and I'm suspecting some other folks on the webinar are concrete too, can you say a little bit more about, in your respective organizations, what exactly does peer support look like? You know, is it these one-on-one sessions? Is it outreach through phone, through Zoom? You know, what does it look like? You know, what are the different ways in which it looks like? Martin, you want to share more about that?
Sure. So yeah, and I think that there's There are a lot of categories that fall under the term peer support, right? Just like any practice where you're using a treatment modality, to use a very clinical term, there are a lot of ways that the puzzle pieces fit in. And so, you know, a majority of the peer support specialists that work for Youth Era, they go through a very intensive training that includes a lot of the things that a regular therapist would learn about. And then they have specialized training around how they can use their lived experience and tell their story, how they can lead a conversation with being able to lead from behind, right? Where they're ensuring that the conversation is really never about their story necessarily, but they're using their story to supplement the conversation and help the people that they're working with to see things in a different way. So we have everything from, you know, the 1 hour one-on-one peer support sessions to leadership groups where you know, we are working with young people who are facing similar challenges. And so our peers lead those conversations through their lived experience, but it can look a lot similar to either that clinician-based piece that I was talking about, but it can also look like having a peer support specialist meeting with another young person at the DMV. You know, if someone has specific anxiety about something, they can come along behind them and work with them in that way. And so, like, depending on what the needs are, the peer support role can be really different. And because how we started, some of our first contractors were insurance based, we do have the model where, you know, we have the notes that we take, and these insurance people are looking like, what are the outcomes? We use positive youth development, which is a best practice to track outcomes that youth have when they're working with our peer support specialists. But we also run the gamut to going into the naturalized peer support. In a little bit, we'll talk about uplift and what naturalized peer support looks like. But yeah, I guess to sum it up, it can look very specific to a clinical kind of seeming clinical, all the way to it almost looks like these are two friends who are meeting and going through something very difficult, where there's a lot of space being held and a lot of emotional support being provided.
Great. And Tia, I'd love to just hear more about, you know, in your role as a chief program officer, sort of what are the things that you think have to, you know, you recommend sort of being advanced programmatically? Like, what are the things, especially in this era with the pandemic and both the mental health needs, but also sort of the platform for being able to connect with one another? Where do you see us going?
Yeah, I mean, you know, so today we're talking about youth peer support, obviously. And so within that context, youth peer support is really special because it's really focused on that youth engagement. And so, you know, that initial several weeks to several months is all focused on like building rapport. And so the peer support role, and I think that a lot of other systems are headed in this direction as well, is really about that engagement and building trust within that first phase of the relationship. And so meeting youth where they're at. And so I talked a little bit earlier about, so we have peer support online and on Twitch, and we're doing drop-in centers on Discord. And like with the pandemic, I think it's forced a lot of us to change our programs, you know. And so in some ways there's a lot of great takeaways, but, you know, providing opportunities for youth to access services in different ways. And so whether that is, you know, so many of our youth, I think it's really surprising to a lot of people. So peer support specialists will provide suicide intervention or crisis intervention. And the number one platform that we provide that on is actually Facebook Messenger. And then second will be text. And then third will be a phone call. And then fourth will be in person. And so there's a lot of shifts like that I think we can learn in terms of like changing some of our services for youth so that it's just more accessible and reaches youth in better and more effective ways. And then it also gives them that opportunity that the likelihood of youth to reach out is so much higher too.
Great. And Satvik, can you say a little bit more about this as well? Sort of what does peer support look like within Runaway, and sort of what are the innovations that you've developed to really kind of advance peer supports beyond sort of, what we might sort of think as peer supports?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, my mental health experiences, like I said, they started very young, and it was me just talking to people in school and helping them out, obviously not knowing what it's called. I didn't know this is peer support in any form. When I was talking to strangers on Instagram, I was actually utilizing active listening and empathetic listening techniques that obviously as professionals trained you learn, but at that time I had no idea that I was doing that. So I think for me, peer support has been a very loosely defined term, and I would like to use it as such to my advantage because it's allowed me to really create these safe spaces, both online and offline, for all our community members at Runaway. And so for us, I mean, it really started freshman, sophomore year for me 3, 4 years ago. We were working on college campuses to create safe spaces, whether it was working with the Women's Student Union or the Black Student Union, or even just, residential halls in general, to just create these spaces where students could come interact with each other, share whatever was on their mind, grieve if it's after a particular traumatic incident. And so we created these spaces where it was basically just peers supporting one another. So there was this mutual aspect of peer support. So that was one of our key components. The other thing that we're now working towards is for our upcoming mobile app. So that'll allow users to actually come online and talk one-on-one completely anonymously to volunteers that we're training, again, in peer support. Again, none of us are professionally trained. And so we've devised our own curriculum that takes into account a lot of the different aspects of peer support. So we're teaching things like active listening and empathetic listening, and doing a lot of role play scenarios with different mental illnesses or different cultural backgrounds, and seeing how we can train our volunteers best to react to each of these scenarios. But the goal, again, is, not for us to say that we're a professional counseling service that's here to advise you on how to take care of your mental health. It's us just simply saying that come talk to us like you would with a friend. And we're just here to, be there and offer you this very safe space to just vent whatever is on your mind. And so that's really what peer support does mean to us. I mean, we have a team of about 100 student volunteers from around the world, all bringing very different, very enriching experiences that they've had, both whether it's lived experiences with mental health or just experiences growing up in general surrounding, mental health and the stigma they've had to face. So I think we can offer a lot of positivity. And I think this resource is one that's going to be particularly successful with young people who don't really want professional help. A lot of times they just need someone who listen without the fear of being judged.
Yeah, I know that makes so much sense. And, actually what you're raising is something that I think a lot of mental health professionals often wonder about. And just to play devil's advocate, they wonder and are concerned about, is this going to take the place of professional support? And I guess I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about to what extent do your respective organizations even interact with mental health professionals, either getting their input and or, do you ever work with those who are treating some of the youth that you work with?
So for us, we've always said that we're never going to take the place of professional services. I think everyone has their own respective place and use in this ecosystem because, I mean, mental health, there's always more people who are going through mental health problems, especially in the world that we live in today. And so even for us, when we look at other organizations doing peer support, we never look at them as competition, because at the end of the day, we're all in this to help others. And so whatever resource might be most beneficial for a person, I'm just happy that there's multiple ways that people can reach out, because that wasn't always the case. If you go back 5-10 years, there weren't as many resources available as there are today. And in terms of just working with professionals, absolutely. I mean, everything from the development of our app to even the conversations that we're training our peer support volunteers to have, we've used professional guidance from licensed therapists and licensed counselors for every one of them. We've also in the past actually given out free resources where we partnered with an organization and we gave out 100 free subscriptions to a virtual therapy platform with licensed professionals for a whole year. And within the app itself, we've built out several crisis buttons. So if we do feel that someone is beyond our capabilities of just peer support, we can actually refer them to a whole bunch of national helplines, not just for mental health, but also for domestic violence or LGBTQ related queries, and a whole lot of other kind of helplines. Plus, we plan to have a few professionals on our board as well who can continue to advise us and serve us. So yeah, I mean, there might be people both within the peer support ecosystem and the professional mental health ecosystem who might think that all these new products come into market are competition, but I mean, I really feel otherwise. And I think I'd love to see even, thousands more coming in and flooding the market, because it just means more and more resources for everyone in need.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for that. Tia, Martin, would you like to share anything about that?
You want to go first, Martin?
Sure. So we, I like using examples because it's better than theoretical. I remember when we responded to our first school shooting, the reason that we were asked to come in is because in a large metro city that we were responding to, there was a shortage of mental health therapists, clinicians, psychiatrists, psychologists. There's a 6-month backlog. And so I'm setting that up because when this school shooting happened, the school partnered with the state and did this amazing thing where they offered all of those things for free for any of the families that were affected by the shooting. And so you would think that in a city that is a big city that's starved for these services, where there are 6-month backlog, that these families would take advantage of these services, and they just didn't, right? And so Youth Era was brought in, and the reason we're brought in is because our youth engagement, right? So we didn't put out a flyer that said, come get support with this awful thing that happened. We said, come experience virtual reality. I know today virtual reality is not a big deal because you can go to a Best Buy and get a virtual reality unit. Back then it was brand new, and youth were hearing about it, but they couldn't access it. So we brought them in, hundreds of young people where they didn't have one family that accessed services before this event. And what happened when they got there? Well, it wasn't a bait and switch, because we gave them that experience with the virtual reality, right? But behind the scenes, there were crisis counselors, and those families and those young people, while they were there kind of in this celebration, experiencing this amazing technology, they utilized those services, and they came back to those services after our event was done. So for me, I think it's more about an engagement factor. I honestly believe that the work of peer support is very different than the clinical mental health background that clinicians provide. I think it goes really well hand in hand. So no, not a replacement. If anything, I think it's a huge asset to the clinical model.
Yeah, I would agree. If anything, I think that peer support, especially now, it's so amazing to see like how much peer support has really expanded nationwide and across many systems. That youth peer support originally kind of started within the mental health field, and now we have peer support specialists who are working within hospital settings, within juvenile justice, and so there's a lot of expansion and like growth around the acknowledgement of how effective peer support is. So that's really exciting. And then I think, if anything, it actually strengthens the services that are already in place, this is a really like common example, but so a youth accesses a drop-in center and they're experiencing a lot of significant needs and a lot of trauma in their life. And they go to the drop-in center to hang out with their friends and play pool, for example. And then over time, you'll see that, this is a youth who would never in a million years go, I'm describing myself, I would never in a million years go access therapy, or I would never talk to anybody about anything, not talk to my friends or my family, what have you. And then after 6 months, a year of going to this drop-in center where everyone's really inclusive and really validating of mental health and really open about these things. After that time, all of a sudden I say, okay, I actually I'm not really seeing as much stigma attached to this. And I see that there's so much power in these services. And so now, I see these people around me and I really admire that they've gotten help. So now I want to do it too, you know? And so then I get help from them around like, okay, how do I talk to my therapist about this? Or how do I advocate for myself in a school setting, you know? And so if anything, I think that it really, like, this age range that we're talking about really kind of just falls through the cracks, you know? And like once you hit 18, there's so much research that shows that once you hit 18, like whether it's your healthcare doctor's visits or what have you, there's kind of like this drop-off point. And so peer support is really special because it kind of captures them at that age range and helps get them connected to services so that, you know, they can go on by the time they hit 25 and really like thrive and have their needs met, you know? And so if anything, I think it really adds a lot of value and also just increases their engagement and like the quality of support that they're receiving from additional services too.
Wonderful. Yeah, you know, what you said reminds me of just the fact that the US healthcare system is so convoluted. To get an appointment with a doctor for any reason is so hard. And to expect that of a someone who had just graduated from high school, maybe going into college, you know, they're trying to live on their own, but also navigate the healthcare system. It's really, really tricky. And so I can definitely see how this work would fit in, how your work would fit into sort of this particular developmental point. And so, so thank you for mentioning that. And, you know, because, you know, I mean, certainly there's so many, and I'm so encouraged by the numbers of peer supports, right? And the fact that your organizations are growing and that there's sustained enthusiasm from everyone, including those here on the chat, about the role of peer supports. But I'm also curious to know more about how you sort of ensure that your peer supports and specialists, you know, are able to handle sort of the enormity of, you know, helping individuals who have these concerns, right? Especially for individuals who have that lived experience. You know, again, curious to know sort of what steps you're taking, what steps that others might need to consider in you know, when thinking about engaging with peer supports.
So for us, the first thing that we ask anyone who's joining our team or applying to join our team is about their mental health, actually, and seeing, you know, if they've had, you know, any suicidal challenges in the past few months, if they've had any instances of personal mental health, whether it's their own mental health or firsthand dealing with other people's mental health around them, and just to kind of understand if they actually have the emotional capacity to deal with some of the conversations that they're going to be going through. And so that's a huge part of our initial screening process for this. And then obviously we're constantly training them in the different scenarios that they might be facing. And every call that we do, there's this role play environment where we're showing them, you know, you could face challenges where you could interact and encounter all types of scenarios. So I think just making sure that they completely understand that this is something where it could potentially expose them to sensitive content or aggravating content if they've had those experiences themselves, I think is very important. And just being upfront and letting them know that, okay, maybe, you know, you're someone with perfect mental health right now, but it could be, you know, this incident where something does trigger you. So feel free to let us know, because ultimately we also want to protect your mental health, and your mental health is also important to us. And I've had those incidences where when I used to have conversations with strangers, sometimes it would get a bit much. And so I just let them know that, hey, I'm not equipped to deal with this, but I would really recommend that you talk to a professional about it, or let me refer you to someone else who does this work who might be a good resource for you. Also, with respect for time, I just quickly wanted to just touch upon one thing that you did mention in your statement about how the medical system is pretty inadequate, or, you know, often fail to help people with mental health, especially young people. I have two incidences. When I was in college, there was a time when I was feeling like my mental health had gotten pretty bad, and I reported that to my RA and asked her if there's any resources on campus. And she actually ended up calling the university police department because she thought I was, you know, potentially going to endanger myself. And the university police department, as protocol, had to come and take me to the hospital to go see a professional. But the protocol is that you can't ride in a cop car without being handcuffed. And so I was handcuffed and put in the back of a police car, then taken to a hospital where I had to wait the entire day before I could see a professional. And once the professional saw me, he was like, "You're completely fine, go home." But I was luckily not in a very bad state, but just imagine someone who was potentially dealing with something traumatic or something aggravating, for them to also go through the trauma of that whole incident happening to them is shocking. And so that was kind of how inadequately people are trained to deal with mental health crisis. And the most recent one was a couple of months ago. I had a really bad panic attack caused by my anxiety. And it got to the point where I thought I was going to have a heart attack. And I went to the hospital, and they ran a few tests on me. I was there for 30 minutes or 40 minutes, and I was billed almost $5,000 for this, 40-minute thing where they just took a chest x-ray, did some blood work to rule out clots, and ultimately nothing came up. And they said, okay, it's probably a panic attack caused by your anxiety, so just go home and relax. And then a week later, I get this $5,000 bill, and I'm like, well, I can't relax now. And, luckily I had a decent insurance. And so a lot of that has been processed away, and I kind of spoke to the hospital to reduce a lot of the bills. But yeah, I mean, just to go through anxiety is, you could end up with a bill like that as well. So I do think that kind of all these incidences do point to this need for more relatable, more amicable, more empathetic approaches to mental health. And I think peer support really does solve a lot of those challenges.
And Doctor, part of the question that you asked, like, came so true during the pandemic, right? When the pandemic started, there was a huge crisis about, like, how can peers, how can clinicians, how can anyone help when it felt like, to a lot of people, like the world was on fire. And I actually, Mental Health America has a clip that I want to show. If you could pull that up, it's just a minute, but we put together with the University of Oxford a training. It's about naturalized peer support. So even stepping further back from your question about how can we empower high school students, average age of 16, to be able to help their friends right now. And so we developed a 5-day training on Zoom, and we painstakingly to make it as engaging as possible. Where at the end of the 5 days, those young people were very sad to leave, but it was all about training them on how to support their friends. So we can play this quick video.
I'm talking about Uplift 2020. Can you believe it? Let's do this. Let's go. It's time to jump into the state of mind that is needed for today.
Just buckle up and get ready.
I think this is amazing. I'm so excited to be a part of this.
We're going to teach you how to connect with your peers to help through this crisis. And you know what? After the crisis is over, those skill sets are going to help you do whatever it is you want to in life.
Each person walks through the world in their own way.
We are going to be our future selves, and we are taking it on.
It was just great.
Right exactly where I'm meant to be at this point in life.
The first group of uplifters have already led school assemblies, saved lives.
We have grown into this massive 360 production to give you the best virtual experience.
I'm telling you, there's no one else that holds the passion and the truths that you hold.
This all starts with you. These are challenging times, and we need you to make the difference.
So with Youth Era and with Runaway, I think the key is to empowering young people directly. The state of Florida is sending one youth from each school district to Uplift. And the idea is, like, there's peer support specialists, and then there are naturalized peer support. And so we're really pushing to kind of increase the grit, if you will, of these young people, because the truth is that youth are powerful. They're not leaders tomorrow, they're leaders today. And in a crisis like this, we think one of the things we can do is come behind them and empower them directly with the skill sets to do this naturalized peer support. And it's been an amazing experience, and a very bright spot is all of the faces of these youth who felt so isolated, and now they're feeling like they're part of a community. So I just think with any kind of project, while we're thinking about peer support, is how can we bring the young person and get behind them and make them the star, make them the people who hold the keys to solving some of these problems.
Fantastic. I mean, yeah, that's a really fantastic video, and I can see how being part of that can allow people to feel so empowered and to step up into that particular role. I also noticed too that in the video, and and also just in our panel as well, the diversity of individuals, of backgrounds. And actually there was a question here in the Q&A about individuals from different cultural, financial backgrounds, as well as intersectionality. And so, I don't want to sort of end without, at the very least, us having a little bit of a discussion on considerations for individuals who come from different places in life. How does this facilitate, a sense of belonging? And in what ways are you sort of perhaps monitoring and evaluating that as you go on?
So just briefly, we built this 360-degree dome, and mostly for Uplift, but we've used this technology to work with young leaders in Kenya with our partnership with Oxford. And so the idea with Uplift is we actually bring in local people in the communities that we're serving to be group leaders. And so the kind of programming changes every time to kind of be very community based. And so whoever the community we're focused on, right? We also focused on LGBTQ with one Uplift. So it's about who we're serving, and those group leaders actually become part of the training. And as far as research, Oxford is a big institution. They did study both of our programs, and we're really, really excited about that data coming out. But they found that even after 3 months, the effects of this were being felt.
Fantastic.
In my experiences, I just want to add that, people want to get help from people who look like them, have the same experiences, understand where they're coming from. And I think that's one of the biggest things that a lot of traditionally counselors and, psychologists have failed to provide, and which is one of the reasons why a lot of people are now looking for virtual options, because there's just a lot more variety that they can choose from. And I think as professionals, as people in this mental health space, we have this responsibility to say and understand when we're not equipped to deal with someone's experiences, and refer them or guide them to another place. Because if a 15-year-old Black boy needs help and his therapist is this 40-year-old white woman, he's not going to feel heard, he's not going to feel seen, he wouldn't know what to even say. And for then that white woman to say, I understand where you're coming from, is just false, because there's no shared experiences whatsoever. And so one of the biggest things that we do at Runaway is to ensure that we're always providing, sharing, and creating resources for people of every background. During the Black Lives Matters protests in the city, we were sharing resources specifically for Black youth. We were sharing directories of licensed Black therapists. We were sharing different educational resources, different Instagram accounts that they could look at, because at Runaway, we knew it wasn't something that we specialize in, but we had this responsibility to guide our youth to different places. Similarly, during the recent Stop Oppie hate protests that were going on, we were also similarly doing similar work around sharing resources for the Asian American community as well. And I think that's something that I want to see more and more professionals do. I think Kelly was also talking about it earlier, is that there needs to be more investments made in just training, in providing peer support and enabling more peer support to be made available. And I think that's equally important, because when this kind of investments in this area do become available, more and more people from different backgrounds can do it. Because traditionally, I mean, just mental health work in general, you know, it's a lot of it is volunteer only, a lot of it is unpaid. And so only people who don't really desperately need finances can actually get involved in this. You know, I come from a place of privilege, so it was easy for me to start doing mental health work. But for someone else for whom like every hourly, you know, wage job is important for them, it's not going to be as easy to get involved in this space. And so I think with direct investments, more, you know, higher salaries, things like that, it'll be possible for people to see more representation across the board.
Yeah, that's really accurate and well stated. Thank you. So we have just 2 minutes. I wish we had more time, but a couple of things. One, thank you so much for the chat. It's been super active, and you know, there's a question here about you know, how to actually go about forming peer support and facilitating that. And I feel like you know, perhaps some of the information from your website and other information that will get sent out will hopefully address that really important question. What I'd like to end with is a question for all three of you. You know, we're talking about mental health, we're talking about advocacy. All of you are doing that and investing your time, energies, and just being so thoughtful about solving this problem. And so I would love to just hear if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about how you take care of yourselves, because what you're doing is enormous, and but at the same time, you know, we want to ensure that everyone has the capacity to keep going, to you know, to be well. And so Tia, would you mind sharing?
Yeah, definitely. I love this question. We ask this question in our interviews, actually, for youth peer support specialists. So yeah, in a time in COVID, it's like, I think all of us were like, well, all of our normal self-care routines are out the window. So it was a lot of learning like new things. And so I wish he was here with me, but I have a sweet little dog that I spend a lot of time with, and I go outside a lot. I live, Martin and I are actually in Oregon, and so now thankfully it's almost summer, and so I feel like I'm coming out from like living under a rock, and so now I get to go outside and stuff like that. And in general, like, I know it's kind of corny, but peer support, like I think all of us can probably resonate with, like, doing this work is also, in a weird way, like really complements like our journey in some ways too, and so it's really rewarding in that sense too. So there's the personal aspect and then the work aspect that I'm focusing on. So
thank you. How about you, Martin?
I do meditation, and I check in a lot with family, because that keeps me anchored.
Fantastic, thank you. And Satvik?
For me, it's two things, and this is also advice for everyone listening, is self-care and self-indulgence. Self-care is just saying no to meetings or calls when I'm just, you know, I need to take time for myself. And so just understanding when you have to take care of yourself, and self-indulgence is just doing everything that you love. So for me, it's eating a pint of ice cream and watching my favorite movie, but it could mean different things for everyone.
Wonderful, thank you for sharing that. So I'm gonna thank you, panelists. I'm gonna just turn this over to Kelly at this point.
You're muted,
Awesome.
Kelly.
Oh, no, I was figuring it out. Thank you all so much. This was phenomenal. I know a lot of people have asked for contact information. This is websites, social media handles. I'm going to follow up with, we have the recording, we have links to the website, social media, and then also contact information for all of the panelists. But wanted to say thank you, Tia, Satvik, Martin, Dr. Liu, for a phenomenal conversation. As Dr. Liu said, the chat box was blowing up, so it was great to see everybody's thoughts and questions. And otherwise, to all the folks who joined in, I so appreciate your time and interest in peer support. The work is so important, and there needs to be investment from leaders, lots of money going into young people's mental health. It should be really including peer support services and peer support programs as well. So thank you all for joining today. We'll follow up with that information, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.